Windows is the most prevalent operating system we have. We do have people now with their Apple devices which run the iOS operating system, and we have a small number of users who are using Android-type telephones.
But in terms of the servers that are used in here, they're mostly serving Microsoft?
They're mostly Microsoft. We do have some Unix servers in the data centre.
Figured. Okay, thanks. Now, we know that Microsoft software contains a backdoor, which is utilised by the US NSA, and Microsoft has been very active in assisting the NSA to circumvent the company's own encryption standards. Do we provide for a specific patch against that backdoor, or is the Parliament's network open to intrusion by the US government?
We implement the patches provided by the Microsoft organisation to their systems based on vulnerabilities that they're aware of.
Yeah.
We don't get any specific advice on vulnerabilities that may or may not be built into the software.
Okay. But you're aware that Microsoft is under a legal obligation to allow the US NSA access to its servers and its hosting services?
We're aware that there are rumoured to be things like that around.
No, it's not a rumour. We have primary source documentation.
We don't have
that's occurring.
We don't have capabilities to create any patches for vulnerabilities of that nature. We're dependent on what the industry provides us and advice that we might get from Australian Signals Directorates.
Thank you. So should parliamentarians and staff working in this building assume that we are exposed to that level of intrusion?
Yes, I suppose you should be able to assume that.
Well, what about ministerial?
For ministers, their home departments provide their IT. Each minister has access to the Parliament computing network in the same way as backbenchers. Yes.
I would have to chase the departments around this building one after another, though,
to see what they do.
Okay. But as far as the work of ordinary MPs, everybody sitting around these tables, most of the people behind, that backdoor is in effect. You've not taken any actions to remedy that security hole that's been opened by the NSA?
No, we wouldn't have taken any specific action.
Is there any reason why not? And could I request that you might take that action on behalf of all of us?
We would be dependent on somebody being able to provide us appropriate patches to close that. We don't have the technical skills to create patches to close that nature of vulnerability. So we would have to take that on notice to work with Australian Signals Directorate. Okay.
I would agree. They would be the ones with that expertise. But if the Chinese government had opened a backdoor in the operating system of every device in this room and in this building, it would be a gargantuan scandal, and presumably you would have called the ASD as soon as you were notified. Is it the fact that it's the United States government that means you've taken this rather more relaxed attitude?
No, we haven't considered any differences between any nation states.
Okay, so if the Chinese government, just to use that as an example, had opened a security hole on every device in this building, you wouldn't have sought advice?
We would have sought advice, yes.
Okay, but have you sought advice given that it's the US government that's done this to us?
No, we have not.
Why is that?
We haven't been given any validation that exposure exists or is there at the moment.
What sort of validation do you need? The primary documents are in the public domain that Microsoft is under a legal obligation to open that security hole. So what validation are you awaiting? It's been in every newspaper on the planet for 3 or 4 months.
We would need some evidence that the exposure has been used against us. We haven't had any...
But have you sought evidence?
We don't have the capabilities or the skills in our relatively small IC team to look for that sort of evidence. We would be dependent on advice from...
ASD?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you asked them?
We haven't asked that specific question.
Why is that? Don't you think it's kind of remarkable? Every device in this building has been backdoored. And you're not primarily responsible for security, or you would...
I am responsible for IT security.
Okay, so do we have a serious problem here, or is this something that you're perfectly relaxed and comfortable about?
I'm not perfectly relaxed and comfortable that there would be an exposure, but it's not one that's been specifically on the top of our minds and hasn't been brought to our attention specifically earlier on.
You're aware that security holes such as the one that we're discussing here is open to exploitation by parties other than the US NSA once it's open?
We're reliant on the Microsoft patching program for their systems.
Yeah, and you're aware that Microsoft is under a legal obligation in the United States to leave the security vulnerability as built, that there will be no patches from Microsoft for this particular hole?
I would imagine that they would give us patches if it was open to others than the intended target or the intended recipient.
When you became aware that this security vulnerability existed that has been built into the software that we are all forced to use in this building, did you notify occupants of this building? Was there a memo that I missed?
No, has not been a notification.
Why is that?
It's just something that we've overlooked.
It's a pretty big thing to overlook, I'd submit to you.
What we can do is, now that you've brought this to our attention, we will seek advice from ASD, generally for exposure like that, which would impact all of the government computing networks, not just ours. We would be expecting that they would give us some advice and guidance on how to treat that.
These vulnerabilities have been in the public domain for months. Were you waiting on an estimate session to give this some consideration, or I'm not sure what kind of trigger you'd be seeking otherwise?
Normally the trigger would be that we would be getting advice from Australian Signals Directorate.